From TMZ, it says, Kanye West storms out of interview after pushback on anti-Semitism. Now, he was on a podcast called, Timcast IRL. And
Heard of it.
Yes.
It's so weird when your office is on TMZ.
Yeah.
I just have to say, going to my job.
So for me, what it was, the reason I even wanted to cover this, look, this is essentially two worlds folding in upon each other and creating a very weird kind of dynamic in my life where Ye is absolutely this territory. That is what we talk about in this podcast. We talk about Kanye West all the time on here. We talk about his relationship with Kim Kardashian. We've talked about him in relation to Balenciaga.
I mean, we've kind of toned it down on addressing Ye's life recently because it's just one scandal after another.
Yeah.
And at some point, what can we say other than we wish the best for him? This incident is interesting because it's just an example of many where politics has become pop culture and vice versa. The distinction is blurring between those two worlds. And now the distinction between those two shows, ours and IRL, is also blurring because we were actually planning to get an exclusive interview with Kanye. Not necessarily even an interview, just a discussion.
He was going to be on here. We were going to pre-record a segment last night after IRL was done.
Having him respond to an article the way you normally do.
No. That was actually if I had a critique of last night, I wouldn't have led with an article. I would have started it as a discussion. And I wouldn't have led with an article from the news that I felt set the show, that it put the tone off.
But how were you guys planning on doing it?
We had questions that we wanted to ask, but it could have veered off in 1,000 different directions, including talking about topical news.
And because it's pre-recorded, we would have been able to, if there was stuff that wasn't relevant or, material to what we were going to do with this show, we wouldn't have had to use it. But in general, the biggest missed opportunity here, for me at least, selfishly, is that I had very specific questions because he played a very big role in my music taste growing up. I have a lot of respect for him as an artist, and I was looking forward to the opportunity to sit down with him and both thank him for a lot of the work he's done as an artist. And you had harder questions. You wanted to talk about Balenciaga. You wanted to talk about Lada Volkov.
I wanted to talk about Adidas's investigation into supposed misconduct where he showed pornography to executives at a board meeting.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, of course, the Balenciaga ad campaign controversy and his perspective as one of their former collaborators. I wanted to talk about fashion with him and just general entertainment. I wanted to ask him about his spiritual journey that's very public.
That was the part I was the most in, because he's been very, one of the things that he was talking about yesterday was that he finds it very necessary that we have a Christian president, right?
Mm-hmm.
He believes that that's extremely important. And you, being a Catholic, had a lot of you wanted to talk to him about his spiritual journey and see if you felt that he was open to more growth, or am I paraphrasing there?
Well, I wanted to know, since he's working with two professed Catholics, is he looking into that faith or looking into the Catholic Church? Is he interested in that faith? And unfortunately, all of these questions that we had will go unanswered.
My questions were
all just turned to dust the second that he walked away, and it's really unfortunate. I wish that last night had gone differently, but there's no point in grieving it, right?
My questions were a little bit more esoteric. I wanted to talk about... we talk a lot about whether the concept of identity matters when it comes to consuming art, right? And the example I wanted to give for him and how his affected me was that I grew up in Minnesota listening to basically gangster rap music from the 90s, right? Stuff that wasn't part of my lived experience. It wasn't part, Tupac, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Biggie, Spice One. All these artists aren't part of what I experienced as a person, but I identified with the music because it spoke to me in a way that had less to do with the lyrics and more to do with what I felt it evoked in me in something. And a lot of people listen to that music ironically, but what I wanted to talk about was there was a very large underground rap scene in Minnesota, groups like Atmosphere, Unknown Prophets, and a lot of that music actually speaks to what the lower middle class struggle is for somebody in the Midwest. Yet somehow when he releases Graduation Day or All Falls Down, stuff that has more about class struggle. There is stuff about racial struggle, but a lot of it has to do about, frivolous spending of money. Is college important? Things like that, things that are kind of connected to my world, but not entirely. That spoke more to me than stuff that seemed as if, because of the other artists who were white artists from lower middle class Minnesota or Midwest, that should theoretically, by the eyes of most identitarians, that should be the stuff that I want to listen to because I see myself in it, or I should be able to see myself in it. But it never came across that way to me. It wasn't what I identified with, and I wanted to get his take on that. I also wanted to ask him, if we talked a lot about gospel, his gospel music. I said the idea is, if is music with a positive message, does it not succeed because it's not promoted, or is it not promoted because it doesn't succeed? Where does in a chicken or egg situation, is that because the labels simply choose not to promote that type of message, or is there a more nefarious purpose there on top of other things? I had stuff like, because originally Milo was supposed to be a part of that too. I wanted to talk about propaganda infrastructure and how a lie makes it around the world twice before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. And the problem is, when you run against mainstream narratives, now this would have been as close to politics as I would have gotten with my questions, is that if they don't like you, they get a lie or a misinterpretation of your motives and your beliefs out so fast. And the thing is, it's been proven that when people are told something, they have a very hard time coming to grips with something different being true. Like if you believe something, it's the first thing you hear, and then somebody offers you contrary evidence, people have a very hard time accepting contrary evidence and changing their viewpoints. So they're automatically at an advantage because they get that interpretation of your motives, your beliefs, your life out there before you have a chance to really make it out to there. And that's built into the infrastructure of the media that is pushed through our pop culture.
Brett, here's the problem. If you had gone down the avenue of asking any of these questions, even the ones that are esoteric and related to art, I don't think that Ye necessarily would have been open to going into those conversations, and you could tell that from the way that way that IRL went.
Yeah,
I think what's hard is like when you have somebody interesting that you want to interview, and especially to get as close as like having them booked, having them come to the studio, someone as both controversial and as experienced as Ye is. I think it's always disappointing to not be able to ask your questions. The reality is you guys would have these questions even if he had never come on IRL, right? Like this is just the reality of having such a unique individual in culture, and especially commanding culture the way he does in so many respects. And I feel like it's such a loss because you guys worked hard to accommodate him and his team to try and make it work for your show. I get to a point where, and I know we talked about this a little bit last night on the show, like we can speculate over what could have been and what should have been, and there are definitely questions that I would have liked to have heard him answer. On the other hand, like maybe this is a show of character enough for us to walk away with, you don't get the specifics on what you would have liked to hear about his experience in the music industry or with fashion, but like we all have seen a side of him both off camera and on camera that is a closer insight than I think we would have gotten if he hadn't been here.
And aside from what we lost out on, the potential for a longer discussion that we lost, I think I want to draw attention to the portraits that were drawn of both Kanye and Nick. We have an artist who works here. She creates these amazing portraits of guests that come through this building, and they sign them and they're framed all across the wall. And they're really beautiful, and like she's really talented, and I felt terrible that they never even got a chance to sign those portraits.
Well, they did get a chance, they just didn't.
Well, also, that is also interesting. Like, did they forget to or choose not to on purpose, knowing that they would leave without the
or were they just opposed to putting their signatures on something for some other
I don't know.
reason?
Intellectual property of some kind. I don't know.
But it does.
But then, and I know that like she was really disappointed that didn't happen. But someone did point out in response to her disappointment that still like those portraits not being signed is kind of documenting in the history of this show and also their careers they walked out that night. And I think that's kind of cool, actually.
It made me think of the movie Mighty Ducks, where when Gordon Bombay misses the penalty shot when he's a kid as one of the members of the Hawks, and then they lose in overtime. And then when he comes back to the arena he played in as a kid, he sees like the Hawks have all these first place awards. It's like first place Pee Wee Championship, first place, and then there's just one second place one in the middle of the huge banner of first place trophies. So now you put those two up and you hang them up unsigned, and it kind of becomes a cultural moment in history for the company.
So I hope it doesn't sting as badly if you can think about it from that perspective, Jessica, if you're watching still.
Also, if I was to give my milquetoast per se take on everything, I think he's a businessman that was absolutely wronged in some of the most egregious ways possible. But as a presidential candidate, I mean,
that's a whole other conversation that's been harped upon to no end. I just felt like I didn't want to drag this out longer than it needed to be dragged out. But obviously, we're not going to pretend that it never happened. And we were disappointed just as much as I'm sure you guys were that you didn't get to watch that discussion happen.
I would have actually
we just had to lead with it and give our perspective.
I would also like to have asked, like, a lot of great artists created out of conflict and, in personal struggle. Like, has what he's gone through inspired him as an artist? Recently, will there be art that comes of this that a lot of people wouldn't be able to fathom because they don't have his creative abilities? It could be that this leads to the best art he's ever created one day. We don't know that. That's a possibility.
Yeah, maybe.
So, thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.